What's up, everybody? Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. Today, we're talking some college football DFS Week 6, the Friday slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Bet365. They have a deal for those of you in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. What you'll do is make your first deposit, then bet $5 on any game, could be a side or a total. Whether it wins or loses, you are going to get $200 in the form of bonus bets. Must be 21 or older to play, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. But take advantage of those. Those deals will not be around forever. All right, behind the glass we go. Here's our data usage tool over at Stochastic, where you can take a look at all sorts of game environment statistics, player statistics to help you make informed decisions for DFS and just know what's going on. We have this along with projections, ownership projections, our new sim tool, just a lot going on, leading the industry. You don't want to miss out, so link is below. 4-game slate, first weekday, bigger slate of the year. More are coming. Jacksonville State kicks this off against Kennesaw. It is a 16-point spread, moving to 16.5 in some spots. 49 total, higher than I thought. These are two gimmicky offenses facing each other. Jacksonville State runs that extremely fast power run game. They're 9th in pace, but they pass 44% of the time. Part of that is they have a couple blowout losses on their schedule already. Kennesaw runs a version of the option. 122nd in pace, 38% pass rate. They prefer to lower that if they can. They're so bad that they haven't been able to. Quarterback, Tyler Huff is an average player for the price, I guess. 269 rushing yards is a pretty good floor. He's averaging 220 through the air per game. Kennesaw's defense is horrible, so they certainly don't scare you. They come in 107th in pass rush, 78th in coverage. They're better against the run, I will say that, but I don't know what it's really going to take for Huff to put up a ceiling. He's kind of just good at both running and passing, average at least. He doesn't really provide you a ceiling for either. Designed attempts, he's averaging 11.3 per game. Pass attempts, 23 per game. So I think he just firmly falls in that like middle tier of quarterback on this slate. He's not someone I'm prioritizing, but he's not someone I'm fading either. At running back, Anwar Lewis and Trey Stewart are forming a committee. It has moved slightly in favor of Trey Stewart this year, but Anwar's been banged up at points. I think this is probably going to be like a 55-45 split with Trey Stewart at the slight head of this backfield. We'll see how it shakes out. Routes, not really too different. You have a slight edge Trey Stewart's way. That's largely just because he's been healthier. So I don't think there's too much to see in the backfield. Their average plays again. I'm not really going to try to get to either of them. In the receiving, and I guess one other thing, Andrew Paul has not played recently. I don't know if this is an injury or not, or if he's just not as good. This is the Georgia transfer. He's not like an elite recruit. He was a 3-star, so maybe he's just not good enough. Whomst knows. Jacksonville State is known for running a receiver rotation. They've lost a few of their guys already. Spector's been out. That's been troubling development for this team that didn't have a lot of receivers to begin with, but you look and see who's running the most routes. It's technically Michael Petway. He has one game at 90% of the routes. Their second most recent contest, PJ Wells, was at 72%. Outside of that, no one's really touching 60% all that frequently. Samario Rudolph had one 60% game. He was at 68% in week 1. Since then, he's fallen to 23, 10, 47. Sean Brown touched 56 one time, the tight end. It's just pretty nasty business across the board with these route rates. I don't know if you can really trust anybody in this offense right now to consistently catch passes. I think that's reflected in most of the statistics. The best guy, Petway, 55.5 yards per game. He just saw one target in their last game. So even he's not without volatility. No one has a target share above 18%. I mean, it's just pretty tough to play any of these guys. If you force me to pick players, PJ Wells would be number 1. 3,600 for him. 9.3 yards per game is real rough to pick, though. This is kind of just a disaster situation across the board. We'll see on this. I don't anticipate being pretty heavily exposed to Jacksonville State receivers, maybe a sprinkling of the cheap ones. It's a 4-game slate, and there's honestly real merit to Xing out Kennesaw, which is unbelievable to say. Davis Bryson, their QB, is averaging 134.5 passing yards per game. He has 89 rush yards. Part of that is because their offensive line is just so bad. They currently rank 131st in pass blocking, 121st in run blocking. So Bryson doesn't have any room to move. But man, did DraftKings really make it tempting to play him. He's barely above the stone minimum, 4,900. He's not a good play, but he's not a bad play either. He's at least worth mentioning just as a pure salary saver. I would rather do that elsewhere, but it's not the craziest idea. They do run an option attack. He does average 10.5 designed carries per game. So I don't know. You could do worse. The backfield is a split. It's Quay Ashley and Michael Benefield mostly. This is like a 60-40-ish split. 12.5 touches per game for Ashley, 8.5 for Benefield. This offense is weird, man. So their tight end Preston Daniel, he's a transfer. He's averaging 5.8 touches per game himself. This is almost like who was that? I guess Syracuse on the slate. We can check. Name escapes me for the moment. Where is this guy? Dan Villari. Reminds me of Dan Villari. You got a tight end in the backfield carrying the ball 5.8 times per game. This is just like what Syracuse had to do last year at times, but he siphons carries away from Ashley and Benefield. He also has a pathetic route rate, so he is not really in play himself, which is a bit of a problem. Compounding the Kennesaw State problems, their number one receiver, Gabriel Benyard, has been out the last 2 games. Reporting is poor for this team, so don't expect this to be reported on. Maybe you'll get a he's warming up or something like that, but I'm not even sure that will happen. Gabriel Benyard being out has been a problem for the offense. You only have 2 other games where players reached at least 6 targets. They've both been Blake Bohannon. He had an 11-target game in their last contest. He's the player you're probably getting to most. Second, I would look at Tykeem Wallace. His route rate has been pretty consistent, 72% to 88.5. I don't love playing any pass catcher on Kennesaw, but those are the guys I'd get to. Carson Kent, their tight end, would probably be third. He had a 69% route share last game. That was ahead of Novell Dean, who was at just 60%. So those are the players I think you want to get to first and foremost. It's Bohannon number 1. I would go Tykeem 2. Then Kent is interesting. And I guess Novell Dean. I'm not playing Moss or these other guys. Benyard, if he plays, would certainly be in play at 3,900. He is the presumed wide receiver 1 when healthy. One last thing on the backfield I forgot to mention. Quay Ashley has a 14% target share. 3.3 targets per game. Again, they run this option attack, but when he's on the field, he does catch a lot of passes. So that's at least worth noting. Second game up, we go to Houston, TCU. Far better games from here on out. 50.5 total is pretty low, but Houston has also been shut out in 2 straight games, and they have yet to score more than 12 points in a game this year. Still, they are implied at 17, so we are projecting a season high in points for Houston against this TCU defense. Houston plays slow, 117th overall, 45% pass rate. They are splitting quarterbacks. I don't know how you would seriously consider either. It was like a 60-40 split in terms of passing last game. Donovan Smith ahead of Zeon Chris. They had the same amount of carries. That factors in scrambles. So this was dreadful for both players, not playing them. Stacey Sneed appears to be tentatively leading a backfield that also involves some Rashawn Sanford and Parker Jennings. They do use the quarterbacks in the run game. Last game, 14 designed attempts for the quarterbacks. So it's not just Sneed and forget it. He is definitely in a committee, and it could be upwards of 5 players when you include the QBs. He still averages 44.5 rushing yards per game, which is a surprise to me, but I think that is not a high enough ceiling at the price to really have a lot of consideration. I would rather play some other guys that we'll get to. Not playing any change of pace. The receiving game has been a disaster this year. Marquise Shoulders, the Tulsa transfer, I believe he has a broken foot now. He's out for the year. I just forget the injury. Joseph Manjack missed their last game as well. What that did was consolidate opportunity, which made them easier for DFS, worse for real life. Manjack tentatively expected back. He's their wide receiver 1 when healthy. But even without Manjack, it's now been 2 straight weeks at least 80% of the routes for Stephon Johnson. He is the player I would focus on in this offense at 3,800 if you're playing a Houston pass catcher. He has the best route rate right now, and it's not all that close. Players like Mekhi Muse, he's only been above 60% twice, and one of them was the most recent game. If Manjack returns, I would expect closer to 45. Jonah Wilson's been parked firmly in the 45% range. The tight ends are splitting time, Malik Carr and Jaden York. It's like a 65-35 split. The only other thing to mention is Devin Williams, the other Tulsa transfer. He did jump up to 75% of the routes last game, which was a stark difference from his previous two games, 26% and 36%. If Manjack returns, I think that would basically squash any upside for Devin Williams. But in the case that Manjack misses this game again, Devin Williams is a name to put on your radar, although he was a pure wind sprinter in their lap. I mean, most of these guys were wind sprinters. Houston, I mean, they stink, so I guess I kind of get why they did this. They just increased their run rate. Their last three games, their pass rate is 37%. Last game, 35%. So I don't know, man. It's a new coaching staff. Maybe they're just playing not to get slaughtered at this point. But now that I look at that on the back end, it makes me hesitant to play any Houston pass catcher, and maybe playing Snead is not the worst idea. Something to think about. TCU, great team total here, 33.5. They're 16.5-point favorites. Houston's defense does not scare you. They currently come in 97th overall, 79th against the pass, and they have the 126th ranked pass rush. So this should be Josh Hoover sitting in the pocket all day. He's averaging 356 passing yards per game on 40.5 attempts. Even with a decline in efficiency, this is just so many attempts. Hoover's just fine to play if you want to get to him at the top. The backfield is tricky. Cam Cook has been dreadful, and they actually saw a spark out of Jeremy Payne in their last game. I watched the TCU press conference. It seems like they're planning on getting Jeremy Payne more work, and I would not be surprised if this sort of becomes like a hot hand approach. Last game, Payne played well. 8 carries, 1 target. I mean, this is a volatile situation right now. We have this kind of middled as like a bit of a timeshare in favor of Cam Cook still, but I don't think you're really interested in playing Cam Cook at this price tag, not with the downside. For reference, in the past game, Payne immediately jumped to 34% of the routes. They came at the direct expense of Cook, who had his lowest route share of the season. This team will throw lots of running backs. I have significant concerns with Cam Cook right now. I do think you see this shift as long as Payne doesn't fumble it away or something like that. Receiving core is very, very easy to parse right now. It's Betch as the number one. He never leaves the field. He has at least 10 targets in 3 straight games, 8.8 per game this year. Then you have a bit of a rotation with Savion Williams as the second most active receiver. His route rate has come in 80 or 79% last game. JP Richardson, he was at 81. And then Eric McAllister has been at like 35 to 45 all year long, although he's very active when he's on the field. So that's the situation we're looking at between these players. I would rather take Savion or JP Richardson at price, even though McAllister has been hyper efficient. You just have more routes, and the opportunity is honestly better for those two players pretty significantly. There's no denying that Betch is the number one in this offense. At tight end, Chase Curtis has missed time, so I don't know if he's going to be back. That has elevated snaps for Dabney, but really what they've done is they've used more 4 wide. And Dabney hasn't even gotten the full workload. Last game, it was 37% routes for him. DJ Rogers jumped up to 34, so there's no clear replacement at tight end. The only thing that will throw a wrinkle into this pass game, which is coming inevitably, I don't know when, but Dylan Wright is warming up for games again. I don't know how active he'll be this year, but he was a key cog in their offense last year. Plays wide receiver. He's a veteran at this point. I don't know when he plays. I don't know who he takes routes from, but maybe at the very least, it just kind of puts a ceiling on all these receivers from a route perspective. Again, don't know if he'll play, just worth mentioning. He'll be back at some point. Michigan State, Oregon. Why is my camera so dark? Maybe it's just the time of day I'm filming. Usually it is not this dark in here. All my lights are on. I don't know. Something to think about. Okay. Michigan State, Oregon, 24-point spread in favor of the Ducks. They have a monster team total on this slate. The total in the game is 52.5. I think that's largely on the Michigan State side, which is interesting because they've moved the ball. They just can't stop turning it over. That'll be Aiden Childs with 14 turnover-worthy plays so far this year. Pace is fine for Michigan State, 72nd. They have a 51% pass rate. Oregon's played a little slower, 86th in pace with a 48% pass rate. I have a little interest in Childs. It's capped because he's only throwing 27 times per game, 211.5 yards, 86 rushing yards. He's objectively a bad play projection-wise at this price. But I've seen his games, I've seen the interceptions, and I've seen him move the ball outside of them. So I do think there is a ceiling in there at some point for Childs. This is probably not the matchup. I'll just talk myself right out of this. 14-point implied team total. We need to wait for better matchups. Like, I don't know if they play Northwestern or some of these other lower Big Ten teams. They already played Maryland. They got to win in that game. But Childs did have 8.8 yards per attempt against Ohio State. Something to think about. Backfield's full committee. K'Ron Lynch-Adams has worked his way ahead of Nate Carter. It's a 60-40 split. They both kind of stink. Pass game's not super important for them either. They have their backs pass block a ton, so I'm not really that interested in either at price. I'd rather gamble on timeshares like TCU with Payne or Stacy Snead at a fraction of the price. So that's kind of where I'm at here. We did see the return of Nick Marsh and Jerron Glover in their last game, the passing attack for Michigan State. They both kind of had a ceiling on their routes. They also got murdered against Ohio State, so maybe that was just what's the point of potential aggravation if we're getting slaughtered? I don't know, but I do think their routes rise with time. Last game, we saw Marsh at 41%, Glover at 48%. Because those two both were sort of limited coming on, you still had Isaiah Johnson at like a 39% route share. I think with time, they're probably back to their normal routes. Like Glover played 100% in the first week. Nick Marsh is a freshman, so he had come on a little bit more slowly, but he had 11 targets in week 2 and still remained pretty involved after that. I think your main 3 wide receiver sets are going to be Montori Foster, Nick Marsh, and Jerron Glover for the most part. As far as DFS goes, I don't have a ton of interest in any of them. If you made me pick, it would just be straight up Foster, target leader on the team, or let me play Marsh, the dynamic freshman. I think we've seen a lot of Foster in his career. I've seen a decent amount of Glover too. Marsh at least is like the black box of the offense as a freshman 4-star. Perhaps he's just way better than these guys. Jack Velling has been a real disappointment since the transfer from Oregon State. Had unders on his props last week. I don't really know a good way to put this. He's just been wildly inefficient. His targets actually aren't bad. When you look at them, 4.8 per game, semi-reasonable. His routes leave a bit to be desired, 75%. You're competing with a bunch of dust. So, I'm not really sure why he hasn't produced. He's averaging 37 yards per game, most of that coming on the 111 target game. He's 3,200, I'll say that. For those of you punting, he's firmly in play for that reason. And that doesn't mean he can't get better. He was a good player with Oregon State. Oregon, Dylan Gabriel's a monster. I think you just lock him in. There's no real reason not to. He's my favorite cash game quarterback. As we've talked about, there's quite a bit of value on this slate and some value that does have some upside, so I have no issues with him. 297 through the air per game, and he has 49 rushing yards on the ground. We know he can run. We've seen it over multiple seasons now. Oregon's been beating the snot out of teams. They haven't needed to run him. So at some point, maybe we do see that unlocked a little bit more. To me, he's just the safest quarterback on the slate. For tournaments, you could easily fade him. There's 8 options, or 7 if you exclude Kennesaw, but there are options if you wanted to go somewhere else. I still think he's a strong play. Jordan James averaging 96.5 yards per game. He either gets there 2 ways. Oregon plays close enough to their opponent where he sees volume. He's averaging 18.3 touches per game. Or they slaughter their opponent so bad where he gets there on efficiency. He's a pretty solid play overall. Whittington still averaging 10.3 touches per game. I have no issues if you want to play a contrarian. Whittington just wouldn't make it a large part of the portfolio. When games are competitive, this will swing more towards Jordan James. Receiving core is extremely clear with Gary Bryant still hurt. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden. I thought this would be a little narrower between Johnson and Stewart, just given Stewart's freshman breakout at Texas A&M. However, Tez Johnson's iced him. Almost double the targets on the year, 38 for Tez, 20 for Evan Stewart. I got to take my L here. Tez Johnson's just that dude. 9.5 targets per game, nearly a 28% target share from Dylan Gabriel. It's worth paying for, but you also have to make decisions. There are expensive players we want to get to. We want to play Jordan James. We want to play Betch. You can't play them all. If you want to just take the stance, maybe this game it's Evan Stewart or Holden, I think you can forego Tez for one of these players. There's still very talented options next to Tez. So that's a price thing, mainly just who's the stud you want. So I think you could make that pivot. Last game, Syracuse plays UNLV, my favorite game of the slate. No slight to Kennesaw, but man, anytime UNLV steps on the field, this is going to be fireworks. They are currently number 12 in terms of college football rankings. I don't care about real rankings. A G5 team gets in right away, and if it started tomorrow, it would be UNLV. They've got their work cut out for them. Syracuse comes across the country for their first road game, I believe. 6.5 point spread in favor of UNLV, 58.5 total, which is the best on this card. Syracuse running an air raid, 64% pass, 66th in pace. Kyle McCord has 44.5 attempts per game, averaging 363 yards. Some of that just cupcake opponents. They played Ohio and stuff. So regardless, the volume is there for McCord, where he is definitely playable. I would prefer Gabriel. Honestly, the last quarterback we haven't talked about, Malik Williams, is the other one I prefer. Like if I'm running one lineup, I'm picking Dylan Gabriel and Malik Williams. But McCord is right in that second tier with like Josh Hoover. He's an awesome play, and he's very stackable in this offense. LaQuint Allen, he's suffering from kind of multiple points. Will Nixon, first of all, is not going to play in this game, so perhaps the workload is more consistent. But we've recently seen Nixon and Yassine Willis take away some carries for him. With that said, LaQuint Allen is still very involved in the pass game, 19.5 touches per game. You see these target numbers. My goodness, he's averaging 6 targets per game. You can still play him at 7,800. I would rather play James. I would rather prioritize good QBs. But this kind of target share does not grow on trees, and part of it is just the air raid offense. In the actual receiving game, Zeed Haynes has been out. That's consolidated a little bit. First wrinkle is they're actually projected to get back Justice Ross Simmons for this game. That's been the case the last 2 games, so we'll actually see if he plays. I don't know. Personally, I don't think he should play, or at least not significantly, because Trevor Pena has been sick, 77 yards per game on 8 targets. Oronde Gadsden plays that tight end receiver hybrid position, like your, I don't know, Isaiah Likely type position. Your Stanford's Ben Yurosek, not Georgia's Ben Yurosek. You know what I'm talking about. But Gadsden's hyper involved, and Jackson Meeks needs to play more. Flat out, he was the most efficient receiver in the country. He's top 10 currently in just PFF's efficiency ratings right now. And part of this maybe is just small sample because he has not played a full-time role. But my goodness, you got to figure this out. He's so efficient, and his routes have been disappointing. So far this year in 4 games, 33%, 48%, 53%, 54%. I guess you can say they've trended upward, but Jackson Meeks needs to play over Umari Hatcher. He needs to play over Darrell Gill. I don't care if these guys are veterans or what it is. Umari Hatcher has a better route rate each week this year. He's been at 76%, 65%, 64, and 64. So he's trending the wrong direction, I suppose. And perhaps that remains consistent, but if you're just betting based on what's happened so far, he's been on the field a lot more than Meeks. So, I mean, you can play them both based on price. It's not like you're paying much for either one, but I do prefer Meeks and just the ascending player straight up over what Umari Hatcher has given us so far this year. Anyway, I think if Justice Ross Simmons comes back, he likely forms a rotation with Umari Hatcher and Darrell Gill for that wide receiver 3 spot. I guess you can include Meeks in there too because he still doesn't have a full-time role. Other than that, the clear guys are Pena and Oronde Gadsden. I love playing the both of them. I want one of them in the lineups. I think you could sort of go back and forth between the two. Pena has been better than Gadsden so far this year. And we get to UNLV. Malik Williams, 7K flat for the monster dual threat ability. UNLV has a 28% pass rate. They're only 113th in pace, but it doesn't matter. Malik Williams, 8 designed attempts immediately in their last game, averaging over 9 yards per carry. No, that won't continue. But Syracuse does not have a good run defense. They are currently 87th. They allowed over 200 yards to Ohio back Anthony Tyus. The matchup is not formidable. So Malik Williams immediately stands out from a floor ceiling perspective because his rushing ability is so good, and he does have a live arm. We saw that in the first game. Actually got Ricky White going for the first time this year, which was something that Matt Sluka had a lot of trouble doing. This makes so much sense. I mean, like, Ricky White, he's going to get drafted, most likely. Let's feed him 11 targets and no one else on the team more than 2. Makes sense to me. Like, it's the Malik Neighbors treatment. He's the only guy in your offense that actually has a pulse. Maybe that's a slight to Jacob DeJesus, who carries the ball once in a while and has been a fine wide receiver too. But Ricky White's different, man. Ricky White needs the ball as much as possible. So it was nice that he locked onto him. The backfield is an absolute, utter mess, even with Michael Allen leaving alongside Sluka. You still have Kylan James, Greg Burrell, Devin Green's involved. I mean, this is just a complete and utter disaster at running back. If you throw a dart on one of them, just give me Greg Burrell, I guess. The cheapest one with the best workload, but I'm not. 7 touches per game is an absolute, utter disaster. Like, save yourself $1,000, gamble on Jeremy Payne, something like that. If I play these guys, there'll be nothing more than a sprinkling in the portfolio. I think that'll do it. Hit on every major position group. Holy smokes, this is so dark. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments, leave them below. And if you'd like to reach out on Twitter, @Matt_Gajewski. Until next time, good luck. We'll see you for the main slate later this week, and I will fix my lights. Until then, good luck.